Around here, we are all about those cozy autumn vibes, so come on in, let's make a cup of tea and paint some flowers, of course. Hey friends, welcome back. My name is Shayda Campbell, and today I'm going to share a beginner-level step-by-step tutorial for painting autumn flowers in watercolor. And just a quick reminder for patrons, you can get this as a coloring page or a painting reference image over at patreon.com/Shayda Campbell if you want to sign up and support this channel. It's just $3 a month or $33 for the entire year. We're going to sit down at my desk here, open up a little watercolor sketchbook. This one is from Strathmore, and it is just the perfect afternoon for painting flowers. A perfect fall afternoon with that warm light streaming in the windows. We've got a hot cup of tea. I like to use a small sketchbook and just a simple little palette of watercolor paints. It makes everything seem so approachable. I've got a filbert brush as well as a round brush. Both are about a number 6 size. I've got 2 glasses of clean water and paper towel for blotting my brush. Remember, all of the supplies are linked in the video description. I have sort of an idea that I might add some Copic markers on top of my watercolors. So, everything's linked anyway, and you can use the exact same supplies. And the first thing we're going to do here is take that filbert and make like a nice light purple. So I'm mixing magenta with cobalt blue and lots of white and lots of water, and then we're going to come over here and we are just going to paint some messy circles. Basically, I just want to paint some very simple watercolor flowers today. Just do some classic Shayda Campbell content and make you feel empowered, make you feel like this is something that's very achievable, because it totally is. So once you've made your messy little circles, we're going to mix up a really natural green. So I like to start with something like olive green and then mix in a little red or a little brown. You get that nice, really earthy green. And we're just going to put a few messy curving brush strokes at the base of these circles. We're painting clover, I'm sure you can guess. And then we're going to make some messy stems, just thin, wobbly lines that come together, and from there we will add a few leaves. It could be just a very sort of horizontal line, or we can add a little pressure to that brush and make a larger leaf shape, but just keep it very natural and organic. And then if you get a lot of blending like I did with the green and purple and it's a little too much, we'll use a lifting technique. So just taking a damp, clean brush and pressing it against the color. That's like your watercolor eraser. That's lifting, and we'll go back in with a purple once that is dry. Remember, all watercolor techniques are covered in my beginner level watercolor e-course, and that's available on my website, shaydacampbell.com. Okay, let's keep moving on. I'm mixing up a pink, so I use lots of white, a little hint of red, and then I put like a red-brown in there to make it just a touch peachy. So white, red, and like a red-brown. Lots of water. And then we're going to come down here and we're just going to paint 5 petal shapes. And we'll join them all together and they make a flower. Duh. We're just making really, really simple shapes on the page today with our watercolors. And then we're going to come back in, I think, with the markers and add detail that way. So keeping it really simple and straightforward. I want everyone watching, regardless of skill level, to feel like this is doable. Okay, next up, I'm going to take a brown. I've got a light brown here. You could mix in a little yellow ochre or Naples yellow, some of those darker yellows on the palette. I'm just going to stick with the brown, put lots of water in. And then we're using the filbert to paint 4 petals. And you just do 1 or 2 brush strokes, and the filbert gives you a really nice petal shape with that rounded end. You can always go back in and refine a little bit, and you can do a semicircle or a full circle. I'm sure you can see it kind of creates an angled flower or a full-size flower. So we've got some clover, we've got a black-eyed Susan, which is a type of daisy. Now I want to paint some asters. That's the September birth flower. So I'm mixing light blue with a little bit of magenta and lots of white to get kind of a periwinkle or a really cool light purple. And then I use the filbert again and I go around and make messy brush marks kind of going around in a circle, almost as if you're painting the spokes on a wheel. And you sort of paint these messy starbursts. And then we will leave those alone and let them dry. And I'm going to come back up here, mix a little extra magenta into that initial purple, and then the clover has dried where we did that lifting, and we can add some more purple. So you see, even though we had that crazy burst of green and purple, we can fix it. Watercolor, you think there's no fixing. There's some fixing. There is some fixing. Then we're going to come back over to the palette, and I'm just going to grab a cherry red. The red I have in this palette is quite bright, so I'm mixing in a little bit of magenta to get that cool cherry red. Then from there, we are going to mix some brown, so magenta, red, and brown. So we're getting this dark, rich red. And I would like to paint some rose hips, beautiful fall foliage that I see on the trail. So we want these oval-shaped berries, and you can paint a grouping. The nice thing about this is you can paint as many as you like and make the grouping as large or small as you like. And then with those on the page, I think we're basically at the place where we want to start adding the leaves and stems to all these floral shapes. We did that on the clover, but then I decided let's just paint all the different simple flowers, and then we'll go back and focus on leaves and stems. So I mixed olive green with lots of brown this time, and I am just going to add wiggly wobbly stems to the flowers and leaves. I'm making leaf shapes quite different. So for the roses in the center, I just did these nice big rounded oval shaped leaves. For the asters, we're doing kind of a more wiggly shape on the page, and I'll do sort of a shaggy leaf when it comes to the black-eyed Susan. So I do lots of small linear brush marks and kind of join them all together to make these shaggy leaf shapes. So they're all a little different. You can see I've mixed a little more water into the green for the asters and the black-eyed Susan, but basically it's the same green for all of them, and that'll give this sketchbook piece a nice uniformity. With the leaves and stems in place, I'm taking a little bit of dark brown on the tip of my round brush, and I am joining our rose hips together with a few stems. I'm also going to take that brown, and we're going to give a center to those black-eyed Susans. The angled flower, it's more of an oval, so it looks a little more three-dimensional, but basically any shape will do. And then I am going to mix a bit of a cooler green, so something more like a malachite green is good for this, or mix a little navy into your green. And you can see I've got an earthy color here, but it's just a little bit darker, a little bit cooler. And I am putting some little pointed oval-shaped leaves on our rose hips. And then I need to come up here and make one more black-eyed Susan. I just wanted to fill in the space. Partly what I'm doing here is painting a bunch of flowers, but I'm also trying to make a composition that looks nice on the page. So anywhere where I have a little bit of extra space, I'm going to put an extra flower or leaf. So you can see me adding to the black-eyed Susan, adding to the clover. I'll put another big leaf down here with the roses. And then I'm going to take that nice dark brown, and we're just going to put a little circle or a little grouping of lines on each berry, and that really makes them pop. That makes them look, like rose hips. They look so much more three-dimensional now. We might put an extra leaf in there. I was a little dark. I just used a bit of paper towel. That's another thing you can use to lift. So the lifting we did on the clover can also be done with a cotton swab. It can be done with a bit of tissue. Anyways, let's rinse those brushes. We're gonna let that dry completely and go enjoy that cup of tea that we made. Okay, so I've given it about 20 minutes. I think everything is completely dry. Some of it was already dry, even when I left it. So had a sip of tea. I thought about how I would like to continue the painting. So what we could do now is a wet on dry technique, where we take more watercolor and add detail, knowing that we can be very precise now that everything is dry. Or we can take a secondary media and add that same detail, knowing everything is dry. So we could add crayon, we could add colored pencil, or we could add marker or brush pen. And that is what I am choosing to use today, just for the sake of simplicity. We want to keep it simple. So I'm doing some little wiggly veining lines, on this black-eyed Susan. I'm going to do an outline on the leaves of the asters. So you get to choose, how you add detail is very personal. optional and it's totally up to you. You can see I'm giving you a lot of options here. Like you could do an outline, you could do just the detail lines like I did on the Black Eyed Susan. You can do just some darker marks, some shading like I've done on the clover leaves. Really anything goes, and it's totally just so fun. I think you can be very free with this step. And what I want to do is build up a bit of color. And this would be the same if you were adding more watercolor. So if you're adding watercolor, mix a slightly darker periwinkle for those asters and, build up some contrast, give it some contrast. I'm doing it with the brush pen, sure, but it could be done with any media. And then I'm going to use a nice dark pink at the center of those flowers. I'm going to use a deep plum to give the clover some life and just make it look a little more prickly, and we'll do some short lines and some longer lines. I'm doing sort of shading and detail work with those little lines. And then I'm taking a light brown and adding thin lines all along each petal here. And then it wasn't dark enough. You couldn't really see them. So I took a slightly darker brown and just did thin lines on each petal. And then I decided to take a burgundy. I'm just making this up as I go along, just thinking about what might look nice. I took a burgundy and I did kind of a half of an outline on the roses. And then I still had some room, kind of like dead space in these two spots. So that is where I chose to put the title and my signature. And then of course I'm like trying to be done, but I'm not quite done. But I am gonna step away. I'm gonna step away at this point. You can add, a little title like Autumn Flowers if you like. If you don't have the space, I don't think it desperately needs it. But I really enjoyed just paring things down, doing something simple and fun. If you have a cheap set of watercolors and a couple Crayola markers, you can do this. Thank you, friends, for watching today. I hope you're having a lovely autumn, and I will see you soon with a new tutorial.